Hello and welcome. This is Jen from drjenbasir.com. Today I want to talk to you about trauma, what trauma actually is, how you know if you have been traumatized or not, what that looks like in your life, and most importantly, how you can find healing from those traumatic experiences. So trauma is something that every single person is going to experience at some point in their lives. In most cases, when we think about trauma, especially in our culture, there are a couple things that immediately pop to mind. All right, we think of being in an abusive situation. If you grow up in a household where you are abused in any way, you've most definitely experienced trauma. If you are a soldier or a combat veteran, even if you're not engaged in combat directly, but if you have been to war and dealt with any of those type of situations, you have most definitely experienced trauma. And then maybe a little bit more recently, we have a lot of refugees throughout the world and coming into this country, and those individuals have experienced trauma as well. But trauma isn't just those maybe more dramatic or intense experiences. We all can experience trauma in our day-to-day lives depending upon the types of interactions that we have and the response that we have physiologically and emotionally to those interactions. So when we experience something that causes trauma, what that experience is there are a couple primary emotions that come forth. And the first strong emotion is an emotion of fear or maybe even terror. And the second emotion that comes forth in trauma is feeling profound helplessness and panic tied in with that. So we've got fear or terror, panic, and helplessness. So you might be in some sort of situation, you're walking down the street and somebody comes out to attack you and to take your purse or your wallet. You're going to immediately go on high alert and experience these emotions. So when we experience trauma, what happens is your fight or flight system is activated. Your whole system, if this is your daily experience where you're at a normal state of being, and all of a sudden somebody jumps out from you to steal your wallet, your whole system jumps up and you go into high alert and arousal, heightened arousal. And this heightened arousal is the fight or flight state. And during this stage, you have a whole bunch of changes that happen physiologically in your body. And they happen to help you get out of that situation. And one of two things is designed to happen. Number one, you fight. Or number two, the flight, you run away. So you quickly, in some way, assess the situation and you decide, I can take this person, so I'm going to take him down because you're being threatened, and so now you're going to protect yourself, so you go into fight mode. Or you realize, this guy is way too big for me and I am not going to win, but I am really fast, so I'm going to get the heck out of here. So that process of either staying to fight or of running away utilizes all that extra energy that your body has just thrown into your systems to help you deal with this experience. Now, there is a third phase of this fight or flight that is incredibly important, and this is something that people experience, I guess I'm not going to say more frequently, but it's very, very common, and that is called the freeze stage. So imagine what happens when you're driving along the road and there's a deer in front of you. What happens? You've got the deer in the headlights. The deer freezes and they just stare at you and you're thinking, no, get out of the way, I'm going to hit you, right? There's also the imagery or the phrase, the wording that we use in society of being scared stiff. So if we can't fight or we can't run away because we're in some sort of situation where we are physically restrained or overpowered, the response is to freeze. You can also think of animals that maybe play dead. They just freeze, they stop, because the fighting isn't working and you can't do the running away, so the next option is to freeze. Now, it's important, I think, to understand these phases because once we understand them, then we can utilize them to have healing from the trauma that maybe we have not processed. So it's not the traumatic experience itself that's a problem. The problem is when we don't or we aren't allowed, either or, when we either can't or aren't allowed to process that strong terror, the panic or the helplessness, and then it becomes a state of being for us. That's when we become traumatized instead of just experiencing the trauma. And so you may have experienced the fight part, the flight part, or the freeze stage of a traumatic experience. So how do you know if you've been traumatized or if you are currently traumatized? Well, one way you can know is by looking at your past experiences. Some of them, like I said in the beginning of this video, are very obvious. If you've been abused or been in any sort of abusive situation, whether that's physical, sexual, emotional, it doesn't matter what type, okay? If you have been in any very high stress environments, like being in combat or experienced being a refugee, displacement from your place of living, any of those things will create a traumatized state, the possibility to become in that state. What happens if we are not able to process these things is that we end up staying in this fight or flight mode all the time. So here's your normal state of being, you're going along, everything is good. All of a sudden the guy jumps out at you from in the street and you go all the way up, your arousal state is very high, you're in fight or flight mode, or maybe you go into freeze mode. But here's your arousal state. Now, here's where the problem comes in. If you cannot dissipate all of that energy that your body has built up to deal with the threat, you stay in that level of high arousal. You stay in fight or flight mode. So your body is constantly then under stress. So what does this look like? Well, what does high stress look like? You probably can see what this looks like in your life or in somebody else's. Anxiety. And not just little anxiety like feeling nervous about something, but anxiety that can be crippling and can interfere with your ability to function on a daily basis. Panic attacks, more intense version of that anxiety. Depression, because part of the traumatic processing is helplessness. So you can get stuck in a state of depression. So we've got anxiety, panic attacks, depression, night terrors, and then a whole host of physical symptoms that come along with being in states of high stress. Gut and digestion issues are huge. Anything that is caused by chronic tension, headaches, possibly migraines, high blood pressure, lots and lots of physical things that can be a result of having a high elevated state of arousal, being in that fight or flight state constantly. Now, the hope part comes in, and the opportunity for healing comes in when we realize that your body innately and naturally knows how to deal with these emotions. That's what the fight or flight is. It's a way for you to deal with it. The freeze part also gives you an opportunity to deal with those emotions if you can find a way to process those feelings after the freeze part is over. So let's say we've got a cat and the cat is playing with the mouse and he's chasing the mouse around and the mouse is now in fight or flight. And he's trying to run away and he gets caught, and the cat plays with him for a little bit and he tries to run away and he gets caught. And at some point he's just going to freeze and hope the cat's going to leave him alone because he's realizing he can't fight the cat and he can't get away. The cat keeps catching him. And then maybe the cat decides not to kill the mouse, but he's bored because now the mouse has gone into freeze mode, so it's not fun for him to chase him anymore. So the cat just walks away. Now the mouse comes out of his freeze state and he runs like crazy and he shakes and he trembles and he does a couple other physiologic reactions and he dissipates all that energy that's been there from that fight or flight, that high arousal state. And it brings his system down. And now he's back at normal. And now he doesn't walk around all day feeling anxious and fearful that a cat's going to come get him. He's not constantly on high alert because he's dissipated all of that energy. What happens to us humans very often is that we experience some sort of trauma and we don't have the opportunity to dissipate all of that energy and come back down to a normal state of being. So we are traumatized because we are constantly on high alert. I'll give you an example. Let's say you grew up in a household where your father was an alcoholic and he was not physically or sexually abusive, but he was verbally abusive. And you never knew when you came home from school or when dad came home from work at night if he was going to stop by the bars first or if he was just going to come home. So you come home and you have no idea if dad's going to be sober or if dad's going to be drunk. And you know that if dad's been drinking, it's a bad night in the household because he's going to start yelling and screaming and maybe throwing things. So every single time you come home from school, you're not normal, calm, peaceful, happy. You're on high alert. And when you're on high alert, you're in that fight or flight mode. You're tense, you're tight, you're anxious, you're fearful, and you feel helpless because there's not a darn thing you can do to stop dad from drinking. So now you have the traumatic experience of dad coming home and being verbally abusive, but you also are traumatized because it's a constant state of living. The trauma is not something that is just a mental disorder or disease in any means. It is something that is actually encased and embodied within your physical body. So the part where we find hope is that this does not have to be an eternal way of experiencing life. Now, you do have to ultimately find some way to get out of that situation if you're in that situation currently, because you're going to continually re-experience these threats. But the key is that your body has a way on its own that it knows how to use to process this trauma and this heightened state to bring you back down to your normal state of being. What we need to learn how to do and what we need to embrace to heal from this trauma is not to talk about the event, to relive the event, or to go through it in some way. That is more likely going to re-traumatize us instead of allowing us to heal from it. We have already been through the trauma. We don't need to re-experience it again. The heightened arousal is the state that we need to come down from, and that state is contained within the body. So what we need to do is learn how to get comfortable with allowing the strong feelings and the physical sensations to come forth and to be expressed in some way out through our body physically so that we can have healing from the traumatic event. So trauma is something that occurs that causes us to feel or creates in us feelings of fear, terror, helplessness, panic. But we do not have to stay in that state of being experiencing those feelings. And when we do stay that way, then we are now traumatized and that becomes our normal state of being. So it's helpful to understand this because now you know, I can find ways to heal from this. It is not a life sentence where, I've got PTSD and that's just the way it is. That is most definitely not the case. Your body knows how to process and heal from these traumatic events even years after you have experienced them. The trick is tuning into those feelings and those physical sensations and doing them in a setting where you feel safe doing so and allowing those things to come up and to be expressed through your body. We will talk more about that in another video and at another time. So for now, take a look at your life and some of the physical symptoms or emotional experiences that you're having and think about whether or not maybe you have this trauma that's been stuck in your body. You don't have to have experienced an abusive childhood or gone to war to be traumatized. But start to look at these feelings and allow yourself to just let them surface when they will and when they want to. And you can start the healing process of dispatching all that energy from your body so you can live a more happier, more joyful existence. As always, thanks for listening. Please share this with any of your friends who you think might find it helpful, and I'd love to hear your comments as well. Have a fantastic day.